If this story moves you, drop a heart in the comments. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like a whispered secret when Dr. Sarah Chin first received the call that would change two lives forever. Her phone buzzed insistently against the wooden desk of the Pacific Northwest Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, interrupting the quiet rhythm of her morning routine. The voice on the other end belonged to Marcus, a park ranger whose usual calm demeanor carried an edge of urgency that made Sarah's pulse quicken. "We've got a situation. Document adult bald eagle, female, found near the old logging road. She's in bad shape, and she's terrified. Won't let anyone within 20 feet without going into a complete panic. We've been trying for 3 hours, but she's getting weaker by the minute." Sarah closed her eyes, already visualizing the scene. After 15 years of wildlife rehabilitation, she had learned to read between the lines of these emergency calls. A terrified eagle that wouldn't allow human approach meant trauma that ran deeper than physical injury. It meant trust had been shattered, possibly by the very species now trying to help. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, she said, already reaching for her emergency kit. "Keep everyone back, and whatever you do, don't try to approach her again. We need to let her calm down as much as possible before I assess the situation." The drive through the winding mountain roads gave Sarah time to prepare mentally for what lay ahead. She had rehabilitated hundreds of raptors over the years, but bald eagles always presented unique challenges. Their intelligence was remarkable, their memory long, and their capacity for both trust and fear profound. If this eagle had been traumatized by human contact, breaking through that barrier would require patience, skill, and something that couldn't be taught in any veterinary program, an intuitive understanding of what it meant to be afraid and alone. The scene that greeted Sarah at the logging road was both heartbreaking and all too familiar. The eagle, magnificent even in her distress, had wedged herself against the base of an enormous Douglas fir. Her left wing hung at an unnatural angle, and her pristine white head feathers were matted with dried blood. But it was her eyes that told the real story, dark, intelligent, and filled with a terror so profound it seemed to emanate from her very core. Marcus approached Sarah with careful steps, his voice low. "We think she might have been hit by one of the logging trucks. Driver didn't see anything, but the timing fits. When we found her, she was conscious but in shock. Every time we get close, she tries to flee, but that wing won't support her. She's been dragging herself in circles for hours." Sarah studied the eagle from a distance, noting the defensive posture, the rapid breathing, the way her good wing mantled protectively over her injured side. This wasn't just fear of humans. This was the desperate terror of a creature that had learned to associate human presence with pain and danger. "Has she been banded?" Sarah asked, pulling out her binoculars for a closer look. "No band that we can see, but there's something else. Look at her talons on the right foot." Sarah adjusted her focus and felt her heart sink. 2 of the eagle's talons were missing, old injuries that had healed poorly. The scarring pattern suggested they had been caught in something, possibly a trap or snare. This eagle had survived human-caused trauma before, and that history was written in every line of her defensive posture. "She's been hurt by people before," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Marcus. "That's why she's so terrified." In her mind, "We're not here to help. We're here to cause more pain." The next hour was a delicate dance of patience and strategy. Sarah had Marcus and his team create a wide perimeter while she slowly, methodically began the process of approach. She moved with deliberate calm, never making direct eye contact, never moving in a straight line toward the eagle. Instead, she created a spiral pattern, gradually decreasing the distance while giving the injured bird time to assess this new threat. The eagle, whom Sarah had already begun thinking of as liberty due to her fierce independence, watched every movement with laser focus. Her beak remained open in a defensive gape, and her body trembled with the effort of maintaining her protective stance despite her injuries. But Sarah noticed something encouraging. Liberty wasn't trying to flee anymore. She was conserving her energy, watching, waiting. "That's it, beautiful girl," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know you're scared. I know people have hurt you before. But I'm different. I'm here to help, not harm." When Sarah finally reached the critical distance, close enough to act but far enough to avoid triggering panic, she stopped and simply sat down. This was the hardest part for most people to understand, the waiting. But Sarah had learned that with traumatized wildlife, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was the foundation upon which all healing began. Liberty's breathing gradually slowed as the minutes passed. Her defensive posture remained, but Sarah could see the exhaustion beginning to take its toll. The eagle's head began to droop slightly, and her grip on the tree bark loosened. This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for, not when Liberty was calm, but when she was too tired to maintain her maximum level of vigilance. The capture itself was swift and gentle. Sarah used a specialized technique she had developed over years of working with traumatized raptors, approaching from Liberty's blind spot while the eagle's attention was focused elsewhere. The towel that enveloped Liberty was soft and warm, and Sarah's hands, though firm, moved with a gentleness that spoke of countless similar rescues. Liberty's struggles were brief but intense. Sarah felt the powerful muscles beneath her hands, the desperate strength of a wild creature fighting for what she believed was her life. But as Sarah's voice continued its steady, soothing cadence, as her hands remained gentle but secure, something shifted. Liberty's struggles decreased, not from exhaustion but from a growing confusion. This wasn't the rough handling she had experienced before. This wasn't the source of pain she had expected. The drive back to the rehabilitation center was conducted in careful silence. Liberty, secure in her transport carrier, remained alert but no longer panicked. Sarah could hear the soft rustle of feathers as the eagle shifted position, testing the boundaries of her temporary prison but not fighting against them. It was a small but significant sign. Liberty was beginning to assess rather than simply react. Dr. James Morrison, the center's veterinary partner, was waiting when they arrived. His examination of Liberty revealed the full extent of her injuries, a compound fracture of the left wing, multiple lacerations, and signs of severe dehydration. But it was the old injuries that painted the fuller picture of Liberty's history, the missing talons, several healed fractures, and scar tissue that suggested she had survived multiple traumatic encounters with human activity. "She's a fighter," James observed as he prepared the anesthesia. "These old injuries should have killed her, but somehow she's managed to survive and thrive. Her body condition, aside from the recent trauma, is excellent. She's been hunting successfully despite those missing talents." The surgery to repair Liberty's wing took 3 hours. Sarah remained in the operating room throughout, not because her presence was medically necessary, but because she had made a promise to Liberty during that first terrifying encounter. She had promised that this time would be different, that the hands touching her would heal rather than harm. When Liberty began to wake from the anesthesia, Sarah was the first face she saw. The eagle's eyes, still clouded with medication, focused with difficulty on the human sitting quietly beside her recovery cage. There was no immediate panic, no desperate attempt to flee. Instead, there was something that might have been recognition, not of Sarah specifically, but of the gentle presence that had accompanied her through her most vulnerable moments. The first week of Liberty's recovery was a careful balance of medical necessity and psychological healing. The eagle needed daily medication, wound care, and monitoring, but each human interaction risked undoing the fragile trust that had begun to develop. Sarah developed a routine that respected Liberty's need for space while ensuring her medical needs were met. Every morning, Sarah would enter Liberty's recovery room with slow, deliberate movements. She would speak softly, always announcing her presence before Liberty could see her. The eagle would tense at first, her good wing mantling defensively, but as the days passed, these reactions became less intense, shorter in duration. "Good morning, Liberty," became Sarah's daily greeting. "I know you're not happy to see me, but I have your medication, and then I'll leave you in peace." The breakthrough came on the 8th day. Sarah was cleaning Liberty's water dish when she noticed the eagle watching her with what seemed like curiosity rather than fear. Liberty's head was tilted slightly, her dark eyes tracking Sarah's movements with an intensity that felt different from the hyper-vigilant terror of the early days. "You're starting to figure it out, aren't you?" Sarah said softly, not looking directly at Liberty, but aware of every subtle shift in the eagle's posture. "You're realizing that I'm not here to hurt you." Liberty's response was almost imperceptible, a slight relaxation of her defensive stance, a barely noticeable decrease in the tension that had held her body rigid for over a week. But Sarah, attuned to the subtle communications of traumatized wildlife, recognized it immediately as a moment of profound significance. The healing process accelerated from that point, not just physically but emotionally. Liberty began to eat more readily, her appetite returning as her stress levels decreased. She started to show interest in her surroundings, watching the comings and goings of the rehabilitation center with the keen intelligence that made bald eagles such successful predators. But it was the small moments that truly marked Liberty's transformation. The day she didn't flinch when Sarah entered her room. The morning she watched Sarah prepare her medication without mantling her wings defensively. The afternoon she actually seemed to lean slightly towards Sarah's voice rather than away from it. 3 weeks into her recovery, Liberty experienced her first major setback. A thunderstorm rolled through the area, and the loud crashes of thunder sent her into a panic that undid weeks of careful progress. Sarah found her pressed against the back wall of her enclosure, trembling and refusing to eat. "It's okay. Beautiful," Sarah whispered, sitting down outside Liberty's enclosure. "I know loud noises are scary. They probably remind you of bad things, don't they?" Sarah spent the entire night in Liberty's room, not trying to interact directly but simply being present. She read quietly, occasionally humming soft melodies that seemed to calm the distressed eagle. By morning, Liberty's panic had subsided, but more importantly, she seemed to understand that Sarah's presence during her time of fear had been a comfort, not a threat. The relationship between Sarah and Liberty evolved slowly, built on a foundation of consistency and respect. Sarah never pushed for interaction, never demanded trust that hadn't been freely given. Instead, she created an environment where Liberty could choose the pace and extent of their connection. The first time Liberty allowed Sarah to touch her was during a routine wing examination. Dr. Morrison was checking the healing progress of the fracture when Liberty, instead of struggling against his gentle restraint, seemed to relax into Sarah's steadying hands. It was a moment so subtle that Morrison almost missed it, but Sarah felt the shift immediately, the way Liberty's muscles loosened, the way her breathing deepened. "She trusts you," Morrison observed with wonder. "I've never seen a bald eagle with this level of trauma learn to trust again so completely." But Sarah knew it wasn't complete trust, not yet. Liberty's acceptance was conditional, limited to specific circumstances and specific people. The eagle remained wary of other staff members, still defensive when strangers approached. Her trust was a gift given specifically to Sarah, earned through weeks of patient consistency. As Liberty's wing healed and her strength returned, the focus of her rehabilitation shifted from medical care to flight conditioning. This presented new challenges, as the process required Liberty to be moved to larger enclosures and eventually to the center's flight pen, a massive structure designed to allow recovering raptors to rebuild their flying skills. The transition was difficult for Liberty. The larger spaces, the different routines, the presence of other recovering birds, all of it triggered echoes of her original trauma. She spent the first week in the flight pen huddled in one corner, refusing to attempt any flight at all. Sarah modified her approach, spending longer periods in the flight pen, sometimes bringing her lunch and eating quietly while Liberty watched from her corner. She began to incorporate flight encouragement into their daily routine, using positive reinforcement techniques that rewarded any movement, any small attempt at wing extension. "You remember how to fly, don't you, Liberty?" Sarah would say during these sessions. "Your wing is strong now. Your body knows what to do. You just need to remember that flying means freedom, not danger." The first time Liberty achieved sustained flight within the pen, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. The eagle's powerful wings caught the air with remembered grace, carrying her in smooth circles around the enclosure. But it was what happened next that truly took Sarah's breath away. Liberty flew directly to the perch closest to where Sarah stood, landing with perfect precision and fixing her with a gaze that seemed to say, "Did you see? Did you see me fly?" Flight conditioning continued for another month, with Liberty's skills and confidence growing daily. She relearned the complex aerial maneuvers that made bald eagles such efficient hunters, practiced the precise landings that required split-second timing and perfect coordination. But throughout this process, she maintained her special connection with Sarah, often seeking her out after successful flight sessions as if sharing her accomplishments. The question of release became increasingly complex as Liberty's physical recovery neared completion. Medically, she was ready to return to the wild. Her wing had healed completely, her flight skills were sharp, and her hunting instincts remained intact. But emotionally, the situation was less clear. Liberty had formed what wildlife rehabilitators call an appropriate attachment to Sarah. She trusted her human caregiver without becoming dependent on her. She remained wild in every sense that mattered, still showing natural wariness of humans in general, still displaying all the behaviors that would serve her well in the wild. But her bond with Sarah raised questions about whether she would be able to fully readjust to life without human contact. Dr. Morrison and Sarah spent hours discussing Liberty's case, weighing the various factors that would influence the success of her release. Liberty's age worked in her favor. She was mature enough to have well-established survival skills. Her physical condition was excellent, and her flight abilities had returned to pre-injury levels. But her history of human-caused trauma and her subsequent healing relationship with Sarah created variables that were difficult to predict. "She needs to make the choice," Sarah finally concluded. "We can provide the opportunity for release, but Liberty needs to decide for herself whether she's ready to leave the safety we've provided." The release site was chosen carefully, a protected area along the Columbia River where bald eagles were known to nest and hunt successfully. The habitat was ideal, with abundant fish populations, suitable nesting trees, and minimal human disturbance. Most importantly, it was far enough from major roads and development to reduce the risk of the kind of human-caused trauma that had brought Liberty to the rehabilitation center. The morning of the release was crisp and clear, with light winds that would favor Liberty's initial flight. Sarah arrived at the site before dawn, wanting to have everything prepared before Liberty's transport arrived. The release would be what rehabilitators call it soft release. Liberty would be placed in a temporary enclosure at the site, allowing her to acclimate to the new environment before the enclosure was opened. When Liberty arrived in her transport carrier, she seemed to sense immediately that something significant was happening. Her posture was alert but not fearful, and she watched Sarah's preparations with keen interest. As Sarah transferred her to the release enclosure, Liberty's behavior was notably different from her early days in rehabilitation. She moved with confidence, her head held high, her eyes bright with intelligence rather than clouded with fear. "This is it, beautiful girl," Sarah said softly as she secured the enclosure. "This is your chance to go home." The acclimation period lasted 3 days. During this time, Liberty explored her temporary enclosure, tested her wings in the new environment, and observed the wild eagles that occasionally soared overhead. Sarah visited twice daily, providing food and monitoring Liberty's adjustment, but she kept these interactions brief and businesslike. It was important that Liberty begin to mentally separate from the rehabilitation environment and reconnect with her wild instincts. On the second day, a wild male bald eagle landed on a tree near Liberty's enclosure. The interaction between the two eagles was electric, a complex communication of calls, postures, and displays that spoke to Liberty's readiness to rejoin her own kind. The male remained in the area for several hours, and Liberty's response to his presence was everything Sarah could have hoped for. She displayed all the appropriate behaviors of a wild eagle encountering a potential mate or territorial neighbor. The morning of the actual release was both triumphant and bittersweet. Sarah arrived at dawn to find Liberty perched alertly at the front of her enclosure, her gaze fixed on the river below where several eagles were already fishing. It was as if Liberty knew that freedom was only moments away. "Are you ready, my brave girl?" Sarah asked as she approached the enclosure door. "Are you ready to be wild again?" Liberty's response was immediate and unmistakable. She moved to the highest perch in the enclosure, spread her magnificent wings, and fixed Sarah with a gaze that seemed to hold both gratitude and farewell. When Sarah opened the enclosure door, Liberty didn't hesitate. She launched herself into the morning air with powerful wing beats that carried her up and away from the confines of human care. But Liberty didn't simply fly away and disappear. Instead, she circled back, soaring directly over Sarah's upturned face. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, eagle and human looked at each other across the divide between wild and tame, predator and caregiver, freedom and safety. Then Liberty called once, a clear, piercing cry that echoed across the water, and turned toward the river where her new life awaited. Sarah watched until Liberty was just a speck against the morning sky, her heart full of the complex emotions that came with every successful release. There was joy in seeing Liberty reclaim her rightful place in the wild, satisfaction in knowing that her patient care had made this moment possible, and yes, a touch of sadness at the end of their extraordinary relationship. But as Sarah packed up her equipment and prepared to leave the release site, she carried with her something more valuable than sadness, the knowledge that she had helped heal not just Liberty's broken wing, but her broken trust in the world. She had shown a terrified, traumatized creature that not all human hands brought pain, that sometimes they brought healing instead. Liberty's story became one of the most celebrated cases in the rehabilitation center's history, not because of the complexity of her medical treatment, but because of the profound transformation that had taken place in her relationship with humans. She had arrived as a creature so traumatized that she couldn't bear the sight of a human face, and she had left as an eagle who had learned to distinguish between those who would harm and those who would heal. In the months that followed, Sarah occasionally received reports of a female bald eagle fishing along the Columbia River, an eagle that seemed unusually tolerant of careful human observers. She never knew for certain if these sightings were of Liberty, but she liked to think that somewhere in the vast wilderness of the Pacific Northwest, a magnificent eagle was living free because she had learned that not all hands were meant to hurt. The impact of Liberty's case extended far beyond the walls of the rehabilitation center. Sarah began incorporating the techniques she had developed during Liberty's treatment into her work with other traumatized wildlife. The patient, respectful approach that had worked so well with Liberty proved effective with other species as well, hawks with similar trust issues, owls that had been illegally kept as pets, and other eagles that arrived bearing the psychological scars of human-caused trauma. Sarah also began speaking at wildlife rehabilitation conferences, sharing Liberty's story as an example of how patience and empathy could overcome even the most severe cases of human-wildlife conflict trauma. Her presentations always emphasized the same key points that had guided Liberty's treatment: the importance of understanding each animal's individual history, the need to work at the animal's pace rather than the human schedule, and the profound healing power of consistent, gentle care. But perhaps the most lasting impact of Liberty's story was the way it changed Sarah's understanding of her own role as a wildlife rehabilitator. Before Liberty, Sarah had seen herself primarily as a medical professional, someone who fixed broken bones and treated infections. Liberty taught her that sometimes the most important healing had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with rebuilding trust between species. Years later, when people asked Sarah about her most memorable case, she would always tell them about Liberty, the terrified bald eagle who had never felt a gentle hand until their paths crossed on that misty morning in the forest. She would describe the patient process of earning Liberty's trust, the small daily victories that led to her eventual recovery, and the profound moment when Liberty chose freedom over the safety of human care. Wildlife rehabilitation, Sarah would tell her audiences, is ultimately about giving animals back their choices. Liberty taught me that sometimes the greatest gift we can give a wild creature isn't just healing their body, it's healing their ability to trust that the world can be a safe place again. The story of Liberty and Sarah became a testament to the power of patience, empathy, and respect in healing the wounds that exist between humans and the natural world. It demonstrated that even the most severe trauma could be overcome when approached with understanding and compassion, and that the bonds formed between different species during the healing process could be profound without compromising the wild nature that made those bonds so precious. In a world where human-wildlife conflicts were increasingly common, Liberty's story offered hope that understanding could replace fear, that healing could overcome trauma, and that sometimes a gentle hand was all it took to change everything. The terrified eagle who had once cowered against a Douglas fir had become a symbol of resilience, recovery, and the transformative power of compassionate care. And somewhere in the vast skies above the Columbia River, a magnificent bald eagle continued to soar free, carrying with her the memory of the woman who had shown her that not all human hands were meant to harm, some were meant to heal, to comfort, and to set the captive free.